stranger. Has this ever happened to you? Hey, you guys think I should buy Baldur's Gate 3?
Yes, dude, yes, obviously. God, you should buy it. Why shouldn't you buy it? Obviously, you should buy
Okay,
it.
never mind. Hello?
Hello, dear.
Hey, Mom.
Now, did you just say you hadn't bought Baldur's Gate 3
Oh
yet?
my
When
god.
are you gonna buy it?
Ah, you hate to see it. Unfortunately for you, that's actually what's happening right now. Quick, buy it. Your mom called. She told me to tell you to buy it. I'm just kidding. What's actually happening is I'm gonna help you finally decide whether or not you should buy Baldur's Gate 3. And who am I, you ask? I don't know. Look, you let me worry about who I am. All you need to worry about is the length of this video. Turns out I have a lot to say, but it'll be worth it.
I swear.
Now enjoy this
Extremely based.
video essay. You will make a dramatic, life-altering decision before the end of this video, or your money back. Wait, this isn't your money? Oh, fudge it. Come on, then. Baldur's Gate 3, developed by Larian Studios, is a Dungeons & Dragons-inspired RPG. It combines deep storytelling, strategic combat, in a deep fantasy world. Set in the pre-existing world of Faerun from Dungeons & Dragons, the game promises a thrilling adventure filled with choice-driven narratives and complex characters. That's all well and good, but I want to lay bare exactly what the game does offer, not what it promises. I recently broke 1,000 hours in Baldur's Gate 3, but I am not one of those people who worship it like it's the second coming of Jesus. In fact, the game has many flaws and shortcomings that I am not afraid to point out. I want to share my thoughts on exactly what the average player will get out of the game, what there is to enjoy, and what things are not so enjoyable. I believe my experience with the game could be invaluable to anyone who's still undecided on whether or not they want to buy it. I mean, it's a big chunk of cash, and you might not even find it fun. Hopefully, if you clicked on the video, that's the kind of thing you want to see, so let's begin. I always like to believe that if a game is good and has a good story that someone clearly put some effort into, I could overlook bad graphics. Graphics don't matter that much, right? Wrong. They do. You're lying to yourself, and so am I! Luckily, the graphics in Baldur's Gate 3 are beautiful and meticulous, utilizing the motion-captured performances of 248 actors, accumulating to a staggering 174 hours of cinematics. Forgive me if I sound like a salesperson for Larian Studios right now, but I hold the performances and the characters pretty close to my heart. I am, however, not blind to the embarrassing, sometimes hilarious, glitches and graphical struggles that sometimes ruin cutscenes, sometimes even quite often. It is also worth mentioning, a lot of the dialogue and writing would probably be considered cheesy or even cringy to most people. I mean, I have loved this game from the start. I will always consider it to be one of my favorites, but even I find myself groaning and avoiding eye contact with the screen at some of the conversations that happen in this game. And look, I don't think there's anything wrong with being overly cynical in life. In fact, I am usually one of those people who hates everything. But I'm also a gigantic nerd, and I find it easy to give things a pass when I love them dearly. Listen, all in all, if you're looking for a blockbuster, pre-season 8 of Game of Thrones style, painstakingly crafted and perfected, flawless Dungeons & Dragons story that's wrapped tightly and neatly with a little bow and delivered straight to you, this is not that game. The story, in my opinion, starts strong and truly does contain some wonderfully cinematic, compelling pieces, and then remains at least mostly interesting enough to keep you playing. I do think that the parts of the story that don't make sense exist in service of the story, though, as it's generally stuff that the average player does not give a crap about anyway, because it's some D&D nerd stuff, and it'll likely only be noticed by those D&D nerds. Sometimes you gotta get from A to B, and no one gives a crap about what happened in between, okay? And I fully stand by that. Anyway, let's move on. I've heard people complain that the player's choices don't matter enough, and they matter too much. I've heard it all. when it comes to this aspect of the game. I do agree that there is sort of an encouraged way to play the game, like as in being the good guy. I don't feel like the game really forces you to play the good guy at all. It's kind of what people wished Starfield would be like, where they're like, oh, I'm gonna be a pirate. You can pretty much do that in Baldur's Gate 3. I would not go as far as to say that your choices are ever really limited. The point of the game is to play it exactly how you want to play it. And I don't believe the game ever stops you from doing so. At least not in my experience. Do certain choices sometimes result in a guilt trip from one or all of your companions? Yeah. Can you just skip through the dialogue by spamming the spacebar and get back to murdering orphans? Also, yeah. Remember, this story takes place in a living world with laws and traditions. But, just like real life, when you kind of go against those laws and traditions, people kind of notice. And they don't like it. I think the game allows the player a great deal of freedom. There's a video uploaded to the Dungeons & Dragons YouTube channel, an interview with Larian's director Sven Vink. Here's a link to it somewhere. But in it, he explains how it was important to them that no matter how you play the game and what choices you make, that you can continue to play the game. Like, you're not going to get a game over screen. And you always kind of know that whatever situation you're in, it's because of your choices, which is pretty cool. There might be a situation or two that result in a game over screen if you make a decision, but I've never experienced one myself. Choices and consequences are a major part of Baldur's Gate 3, and I personally felt like I was offered a tremendous amount of freedom. So if that appeals to you, you'll likely enjoy the game. Just keep in mind that you'll reap what you sow. I find exploration extremely fun in any game. If you give me a big old blank map, I'm heading straight for every landmark and funny looking thing to see what's there. Baldur's Gate 3 has no shortage of ground to cover, as all 3 of its acts are exceptionally designed and detailed, and they're all completely packed with stuff to do. I think Act 1 is pretty intuitively set up to kind of guide you toward the quests and then the important stuff. It gets a bit messier around Act 2 and 3, but I kind of think that was intentional to signal to the player that the training wheels are off. If you've played Divinity Original Sin 2, their previous game, you may remember points when you felt sort of aimless or directionless, lost. It's usually the point of the game where players lose interest and just don't play again. Baldur's Gate 3 kind of has a similar point in its story, but it's not until Act 3. And by then, I feel like you're kind of invested, you kind of want to get through it, so it usually gives you enough incentive to make it through until you find your footing again. I genuinely think that Larian really improved on their formula for this game, and it shows. So don't let the DOS2 but D&D fear hold you back. If you did play Divinity 2 and you enjoyed it, I'll start out by saying that the 2 games are structurally similar, but a whole different rule set and kind of a lot different in general. Coming from DOS2, you'll find the game is also laid out in acts, as you probably know. I even found some of the locations kind of visually similar to the locations in DOS2, but not so similar as to infringe upon it. It was just kind of a cute thing I noticed. As I'm sure you know, Baldur's Gate 3 uses tactical turn-based combat like Divinity 2. And the difficulty settings are similar, with story mode, balanced mode, tactician mode, and an even harder difficulty called honor mode, which I assume is reserved for people who hate themselves. Unlike DOS2, we no longer use the action point system, wherein you're given a certain amount of action points at the beginning of your turn, and you use them to move, cast spells, everything. Everything is dictated by action points. In Baldur's Gate 3, you use the Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition rule set. 5th edition consists of a strict layout for how one turn goes. You roll initiative in the same way as in Divinity 2, but on a turn, you get X amount of movement, no matter what. You get 1 action, no matter what, and 1 bonus action usually. Actions and bonus actions could be broken down into what they actually mean, but for brevity I'm not going to go there. My point is that if you're accustomed to DOS2 and your action points dictating your movement and everything on your turn, Baldur's Gate 3 does not use that system. I do think that most people who enjoyed combat in Divinity will enjoy combat in Baldur's Gate 3 because it's very similar and you get to kind of strategize and plan your turns in a similar way. Baldur's Gate 3 shares another similarity to Divinity, which is its depth and its attention to detail. I've played both Baldur's Gate 3 and Divinity 2 from start to finish roughly 4 or 5 times each, and pretty much every playthrough I did, I found some new thing that I hadn't seen before. Now, I feel like this point can be a pro or a con. It sounds like a pro, obviously, but if you're a completionist, nothing wrong with that. But if you really just enjoy getting every single thing done and ticking every single thing off your list, you may hate this game. It's actually impossible to find every single thing in the game on one playthrough. That is good for people who enjoy replaying things and enjoy kind of finding new things all the time, but it's probably pretty bad for someone who wants to get everything checked off their first time. The reason it's not possible is because the choices you make, like we mentioned before, impact the story and change the story for your character. You're often asked to choose a side, and once you choose that side, the other side is completely removed from the game for you. As in, it's still there opposing you, but you have no chance of joining it or even seeing what's over there. So when I recorded this, I didn't really word my final point about Divinity very well, so I'll just redo it here. I think that if you did like Divinity, you will definitely like Baldur's Gate 3. And if you didn't like Divinity, you have a good chance of still liking Baldur's Gate 3 because, again, like I said before, they really have, I think, perfected the formula for this game. I think it stands very well on its own and can be easily enjoyed by even someone who hated Divinity, especially if you're a D&D fan. The Dungeons and Dragons aspect of Baldur's Gate 3 can be a deal breaker for a lot of people. Anyone who's played Baldur's Gate 1 or 2 could tell you that Dungeons and Dragons has a pretty horrible track record for being translated into video game form. It's just not meant to be played as a video game. I've played and run Dungeons and Dragons games weekly, sometimes multiple times a week, for about 5 years now, and I know that's not a terribly long time, but I think I have a pretty solid grasp on the rules and an above average understanding of the lore, at least on the Sword Coast of Faerun, where a lot of the stories take place. And that's also where Baldur's Gate 3 takes place. Do you need to know all of the ins and outs of D&D to be able to enjoy this game? No, not at all. I think Baldur's Gate 3 works as a pretty decent introduction to D&D for people who are interested or even people who are a bit rusty. Will you find the game more enjoyable if you do have some grasp of D&D and her lore? Yeah, probably. Playing Baldur's Gate 3 without, like, a background knowledge of the various famous characters, the pantheon of deities, the race relations, the available classes and subclasses, and the locations of D&D might feel overwhelmed with just the stuff that's thrown at you from the very beginning, from before the beginning actually. In the character creation, you're given 11 races, 31 sub-races, 12 classes, and 46 subclasses. And hell, to the uninitiated, that might be the fastest refund Steam has ever given. If you're the type of person who prefers a simple character creation, such as Dragon Age's Warrior, Rogue, or Mage, you might find Baldur's Gate 3 overly complex and therefore not fun. One thing to note about this, however, is you can change your class and the way you look at any point during the game. What I mean is you're not permanently stuck with all of your choices, but again, if you have no understanding of the classes and things that are available to you and what they're about, it might not matter to you. To wrap this up, I think Baldur's Gate 3 is best suited for players who have at least some either knowledge or interest in the knowledge of D&D and especially the classes, because there are a lot of words thrown at you that you may have no interest in. I think the game does a decent job of pulling you through the story, even if you have no clue what anyone's talking about, and still keeps it fun, but I guarantee you will enjoy the game more if you recognize some of the things you're hearing and seeing, or at least are interested in learning more about it. Now that we've all aged 20 years since the beginning of this video, hopefully you've made up your mind by now. But if not, if you're still fence-sitting, still wondering if the game is too long or too lonely, fear not. It's multiplayer. I do have a disclaimer. I highly recommend completing the game on your own at least one time to fully appreciate everything the game has to offer. But if you don't give a crap about none of that sentimental stuff, if you don't care, it's fine. You just want to have a blast with your friends, go for it. It's really fun. Since the game's official release, they've done a lot of work on the multiplayer experience, and they've really made a solid effort in fixing a lot of the things that were wrong with it. You and up to 3 friends can join the same lobby and experience the game together if that's what you're into. You're still able to recruit and speak to the different companion characters that are in the game, but you can only ever explore or do combat with 4 characters total. So if you have 3 friends and yourself, you can't have any of the companion characters come with you when you explore, but they will be waiting at your camp to talk to you and mention things about the plot that is happening. Completing quests, starting dialogue, and discovering different points on the map is all done by a first come, first served basis, so whoever on your team gets to a place first is the one who gets to initiate the dialogue and find the stuff. Doesn't super matter for discovering things, but it can be a little bit annoying if you have friends who are kind of trolls and they just want to dick around and do dumb stuff all the time. For whoever does start the dialogue, the rest of you only have to click that player's portrait in order to eavesdrop on their conversation, and you will see the same cutscenes and the dialogue options that they're seeing, and the related dice rolls if there are any. The eavesdropping feature can be turned off, however, in the gameplay setting, if you prefer to keep your conversations private so that only you can see them. Depending on how close you are to your friends, it can really come in handy for those steamy oh my god, I forgot to talk about this.
Okay, look, this game has an unfortunate reputation for being, well, it certainly can be if you want it to be. Pretty much every companion is gonna really like your character by the end of the game, unless you kind of really go out of your way to upset them. And you are free to pursue a romantic relationship with any of the companions, of course. Unfortunately, as of January 2024, there's not really a lot of options for like platonic relationships, but Larian has said they're working on that, so who knows? As I was saying, you can have a relationship with any of the companions, and they all have various romance scenes and dialogue and stuff, but you're never pressured by the game to reciprocate any of those relationships. In fact, ace or asexual playthroughs happen all the time. They're super normal, and they even happen by accident sometimes when you just don't really talk to any of your companions. But otherwise, there's no need to let the looming threat of intercourse scare you away from Baldur's Gate 3. No matter what, you're pretty much always able to halt a scene if you think it's going too far, or you can just spam the space button and avert your eyes and spare yourself of any scenes that are too hot for TV, you know what I'm saying? So yeah, that's
What are you doing in there?
nothing. I gotta go.
In conclusion, Baldur's Gate 3 is a must-play for RPG enthusiasts to appreciate a deep, immersive experience with focus on player choice. If you're a fan of Dungeons and Dragons, it will greatly enhance your enjoyment of the game. You don't gotta be an expert, but some knowledge will help you a lot. If you love a good D&D game story thing that's actually good this time, it'll be a great addition to your library. But if you hate a good D&D adventure, or you like a fast-paced, action-y, linear narrative type game, you're gonna probably hate this game. So, choose. Time to decide. Go. Okay, I'll remind you of what my points were. You don't gotta be an expert in D&D to play, but some knowledge will enhance your experience. The game's excruciatingly detailed, and so much love and passion and effort went into creating it that you will notice. It's similar to Divinity Original Sin 2, but not really, because the rule set's different and your choices matter a lot more. And you can play with your friends, and also, unrelated to that, the sex scenes are completely optional. It is now time for you to decide. Will you buy it? Will you skip it? Will you ever play a video game again? Honestly, I could understand if you choose not to. Making a decision is probably the hardest thing you will do today. Nah, who am I kidding? I don't know you. I don't know your life. You could be a coal miner. Anyway, please don't forget to like and subscribe if you liked it, or dislike it if you dislike it. But do subscribe or I'll die. I'm just kidding. Bye!